The sergeant drenched her. She went full Navy SEAL and took him down. There are moments on a military base when time seems to slow, when the air becomes heavier, the lighting sharper, and every breath feels like it's being recorded for someone else to judge later. Moments when a soldier finds out who they really are and what the uniform really means. This story happened on Fort Briswell, a mid-sized installation tucked between long stretches of New Mexico desert. A place where the wind carried sand and secrets with equal indifference. A place where discipline wasn't just expected. It was demanded, sometimes by the right men, and sometimes by the wrong ones. This is the story of Seaman First Class Lena Hart, a quiet transfer from the Navy who said very little, saluted perfectly, and kept her barracks spotless. Her file said nothing unusual, nothing special, nothing remarkable. But files don't tell you everything. Some truths live only in the shadows between orders, and Lena carried a truth that could break steel. Fort Briswell wasn't a glamorous posting, not like Coronado, not like Pendleton. It was the kind of base where careers plateaued, where egos inflated, and where leadership sometimes hid behind rank instead of earning it. The unit Lena was assigned to, 3rd Joint Response Company, was known for its uneven leadership and tight internal politics. Most were good men, a few were not. At the center of it all was Sergeant Blake Harlan, a man whose voice could shake rafters and whose temper could strip paint. He had a reputation for crossing lines, but always just shy of where paperwork started. When Lena walked into the morning formation for the first time, wearing her crisp uniform and unreadable expression, most eyes glanced once and moved on. She was small, quiet, reserved, the kind soldiers tend to underestimate. But Harlan, he noticed her. Not the way a mentor notices talent, the way a wolf notices a lone deer on the edge of the herd. It only took 48 hours for whispers to spread. She came from the Navy. Something about special training. No, that's fake. If she was real, she wouldn't be here. Yeah, right. SEALs don't end up in Briswell. They didn't know that Lena had kept her true record sealed. Didn't know she had completed Joint SOF assessment phase. Didn't know she had run missions she would never be allowed to speak about. They didn't know because she didn't say. Silence was the one thing the Navy had taught her better than anything else. But silence around small men feels like defiance, and Harlan hated defiance. It started during a late evening gear inspection. The sun had dropped behind the desert ridgeline, leaving a blood-orange glow fading into deep indigo. Floodlights hummed overhead as the unit stood in a rough semicircle. The air smelled like dust, oil, and tension. Harlan paced in front of the formation, boots thudding, chin lifted. "Your gear is your religion," he barked. "If you can't maintain it, you're dead weight." He stopped in front of Lena. Her pack was immaculate. Her weapons were spotless. Her boots were laced tighter than half the unit. He didn't care. "What's this?" he snapped, pointing to a barely perceptible smudge on the edge of her ruck frame. "Sir, it's from Transit." "Transit?" He cut her off. "No excuses. You think you're better than my standards?" "No, Sergeant." But the monotone calmness in her voice, steady, unshaken, made him twitch with irritation. He leaned in, too close. "You think your Navy background means something here?" Silence. The unit watched. Harlan's nostrils flared. "Drop your gear." She did, front and center. She stepped forward. Harlan grabbed a nearby water container, the heavy kind used for field showers or large cleanups. It sloshed loudly. Full. "Quiet," Harlan snapped. He positioned himself in front of Lena, gaze cold. "You want to bring dirt into my formation?" he growled. "Fine. Then you can learn how to get clean." He tilted the container. Lena didn't move. Not out of fear, out of discipline, out of restraint, because she had been trained for far worse than humiliation. The water crashed down on her like a wave, cold, heavy, drenching her uniform, soaking her hair, running into her boots. The formation went dead silent. The desert wind stung against her wet skin. Harlan smirked. "Next time," he sneered, "take a shower before showing up." And he turned away. But that was his mistake. What happened next wasn't rage, it wasn't impulse, it wasn't revenge, it was survival instinct, pure, trained, automatic. Harlan made the mistake of turning his back to someone trained to neutralize threats faster than thought, but Lena didn't attack. Not yet. It was when Harlan deliberately shoved another soldier out of the way, laughing, that it happened, because that soldier nearly fell onto Lena's drenched gear, a second violation, a second flare of aggression, and SEAL instincts are built on patterns. Trigger threat, neutralize. She reacted faster than any of them saw. One moment Harlan was laughing, the next he was on the ground, flat on his back, arm twisted behind him, Lena pinning him effortlessly with a textbook joint lock. The formation gasped. Harlan couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't believe what had just happened. Her voice stayed calm, quiet, professional. "Sergeant, stop resisting." She didn't yell. She didn't overreact. She simply executed exactly what she had been trained to do. Stop a threat with minimum damage. Harlan thrashed. "A mistake." She tightened her hold, locking his shoulder. He froze in pain. "Are you injured?" she asked. He wheezed, unable to answer. "Are you injured?" "No," he stammered. She released him instantly and stood at attention, dripping water, face unreadable. The entire formation stood frozen. No one had ever seen anything like it. And Harlan, big, loud, untouchable Harlan, struggled to his feet, red-faced, trembling, humiliated in front of his own unit. His eyes burned with fury. You're finished," he hissed. "I'll bury you for this." But Lena didn't flinch, because she had faced worse threats than a man with stripes. Word spread in under an hour. Half the soldiers claimed they didn't see anything. The other half were terrified to talk. Harlan spent the night filing a complaint. Lena spent the night sitting motionless on the edge of her bunk, still damp, staring at the wall. Not afraid, just tired. She had promised herself she would never use her SEAL training again on American soil except to protect life. But the moment Harlan shoved that other soldier, he had become a threat. Still, she knew how the system worked. Rank protects rank. Reputation protects predators, and heroes often look like villains on paper. And she had spent her career in the shadows of classified silence. No one could verify her past without layers of clearance. She was alone, or so she thought. The next morning, she was summoned to Building 12, the administrative hub. She walked in expecting hostility. What she didn't expect was Commander Joel Raskin, the base's toughest investigator, sitting at the table with a thin file in front of him. He studied her quietly. "You Hart?" "Yes, sir." "You know why you're here?" "Yes, sir." He flipped open the file. Only 2 pages, too thin. "Sergeant Harlan claims you attacked him without provocation, that you reacted violently during a simple disciplinary correction." "Yes, sir." "You disputing that?" "No, sir." He looked up sharply. "You're admitting it?" "I'm stating the action occurred," she replied evenly. "And the reason?" Lena clasped her hands behind her back. "Sergeant Harlan created a hostile and unsafe environment," she said. "I responded with minimum force necessary to stop the immediate threat." Raskin tapped a pen. "Witnesses are unclear." "I understand, sir. You know what that means?" "Yes, sir." He leaned back. Then he did something unexpected. He slid another file, thicker, sealed, onto the table. "This crossed my desk last night," he said. "Your restricted record." Lena's jaw tightened. "How did he—" "I have clearance," he said before she could ask. "And a responsibility to know who's on my base." He opened it. Not fully, just enough for her to know he'd seen the truth. His eyes softened. "You're not exactly the new kid you appear to be." "No, sir. You could have broken that man in half." "Yes, sir." "But you didn't." "No, sir." Raskin closed the file and exhaled. Then he said quietly, "Harlan's not the first soldier to abuse his position, but this is the first time one picked a fight with someone who can actually fight back." Silence. Then, "You did the right thing, Hart," he said. "But doing the right thing doesn't always protect you from consequences." Lena swallowed. "Yes, sir." He stood. "You let me handle the politics," he said. "You keep your nose clean, understood?" "Yes, sir." "And Hart?" "Yes, sir." That was one hell of a takedown. The corner of her mouth twitched. "Thank you, sir." Over the next week, the base buzzed with tension. Harlan avoided the unit entirely. Rumor said he'd been demoted pending review. Others said he'd been suspended. But bullies don't go quietly. 2 days later, Harlan burst into the mess hall, shoulders squared, fury barely contained. He spotted Lena sitting alone, eating quietly, back straight, eyes focused on her tray. He marched toward her. The room froze. "You think you won?" he snarled. "You think this is over?" Lena looked up, calm. "No, Sergeant. I think you're still speaking." That hit him harder than any punch. He slammed a hand onto the table. "You embarrassed me in front of my unit." "No, Sergeant," she said again. "You embarrassed yourself. Someone choked on their drink." Harlan leaned closer, breath shaking. "You're dead here, Hart. I will make sure. Sergeant." The voice behind him made every spine straighten. Commander Raskin, hands clasped behind him, expression cold enough to crack stone. "You're not authorized to approach this soldier, nor to engage in any form of intimidation. You are hereby relieved of all command duties effective immediately." Harlan went pale. You can't." "I can. And I have." Two MPs walked up beside him. "Sergeant Blake Harlan," Raskin said with icy clarity. "You are under investigation for abuse of authority, hostile conduct, and endangerment of personnel." The mess hall was silent. Dead silent. Harlan's eyes widened at Lena. "This isn't over," he whispered. Lena held his gaze. "It is now." And with that, the MPs escorted him out. Raskin approached Lena's table. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir." He nodded. "Finish your meal." 3 days later, the official report was released. Sergeant Harlan, removed from duty, charges recommended for court-martial. The unit breathed easier. For the first time since arriving, Lena walked through the base without tension clawing at her spine. Soldiers she barely knew nodded at her. A few clapped her on the shoulder. One said softly, "Thanks. We needed someone like you." She didn't smile, but she felt something lift inside her. Not pride, not victory, just restoration. Then came the call. She was summoned once again to Building 12. Raskin stood waiting with 2 envelopes. "These are yours," he said. "One is your official exoneration." She accepted it. "The other," he continued, "is a transfer offer." Her breath caught. "To where, sir?" He slid the envelope across the desk. "Naval Special Warfare Command. They want you back." Her fingers tightened. She hadn't expected that. Not after everything. Not after leaving the shadows behind. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently. "But they requested you personally." She looked down. The seal trident watermark embossed on the envelope glinted under the fluorescent lights. Her past calling her home. Her present finally breathing clean air. Her future unknown. Raskin's voice softened. "You stood up for yourself, Hart, and for others. That's the kind of soldier the SOF community values." She looked up, steady. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. Thank you." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind those 2 words. Lena stood on the ridge overlooking Fort Briswell. The desert wind tugged gently at her hair. The sun rose behind her, casting long shadows across the base where she had faced humiliation, confrontation, and justice. She held both envelopes in her hands, one representing closure, one representing destiny. But regardless of what she chose next, her story at Briswell had already mattered, because one soldier, one quiet, disciplined, underestimated soldier, had reminded an entire base what courage looked like. Not the loud kind, not the violent kind, the steady kind, the kind that stands unbroken in the face of abuse, the kind that stays calm while drenched in humiliation, the kind that acts with skill, restraint, and honor, even against someone wearing more rank, the kind that says, "Enough." Lena did accept the transfer, but not immediately. She stayed at Fort Briswell for another 3 months, long enough to see the unit rebuild, long enough to mentor younger soldiers, long enough for the atmosphere to change from fear to discipline. When she finally left, the unit stood in silent formation as she walked to the transport truck, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. Some saluted, some nodded, some simply watched, but all of them understood. She wasn't just a soldier, she was the example they wanted to follow. True courage isn't in battle, but in standing for what's right, even when you stand alone.